Sometimes, the biggest battles begin with a simple phone call. For me, it happened on an otherwise uneventful Tuesday morning. I was sipping my coffee, about to head out for work, when my phone buzzed with an unknown number. Normally, I would ignore it, but something told me to pick up. "Mr. Carter?" a cold female voice asked. "Yes, speaking." "This is Sarah Middleton from the Green Pines HOA board. I'm calling to inform you of an official notice. During our routine inspection yesterday, we identified an unauthorized structure on your property." I frowned. "What structure?" "Your driveway. The private road leading to your property does not have the proper HOA approval. According to local regulations, it must be removed. You have 14 days to comply." I nearly choked on my coffee. "My driveway?" "Mrs. Middleton, that driveway has been here for over 50 years. My father, my grandfather, even his father used that road. How can the HOA suddenly claim it's illegal?" "Mr. Carter," she continued, now sounding impatient, "as part of this community, you must adhere to the same regulations as everyone else. Our records show no official approval for the driveway." I clenched my fist. "And who did this inspection exactly?" "Our compliance team. There's nothing more to discuss. If you fail to remove it, fines will be issued and legal action may follow." Before I could say another word, she hung up. I stood there for a moment staring at my phone. The same driveway that had existed for generations was suddenly illegal. The HOA had never bothered me before. Now, out of nowhere, they were threatening legal action? Something wasn't right. Later that day, I dug through my grandfather's old records. He had been meticulous in keeping legal documents. If there was ever an official approval for the driveway, he would have kept it. After hours of searching, I found exactly what I needed: the original land deed and property survey from 1965. It clearly showed that the driveway had been part of the property long before the HOA even existed. Armed with my documents, I marched down to the HOA office the next morning. Sarah Middleton sat behind her desk, as smug as ever. "Mr. Carter, I assume you're here to comply with our notice?" I dropped the folder onto her desk. "I'm here to inform you that my driveway is completely legal." She barely glanced at the papers. "Unfortunately, without an HOA-issued permit, those records are irrelevant." That's when I realized. The HOA wasn't following the law. They were making it up as they went. So I decided to hit them where it hurt. If they wanted to play dirty, so could I. That afternoon, I hired a land surveyor to inspect the HOA's main entrance road, the one leading to their office and common area. Sure enough, after some research, I found something beautifully ironic. The HOA's own driveway was not legally recorded in the county records. In fact, it had been built illegally across protected land. With this bombshell information, I scheduled an urgent meeting with the town's mayor, a longtime friend of my father. He was not fond of HOAs, especially ones abusing their power. When I showed him the evidence, he laughed. "Oh, this is going to be fun." The following week, the HOA scheduled a meeting to discuss my compliance failure. I walked in with the mayor by my side. Sarah Middleton's smug smile quickly disappeared. I stood at the podium. "Before we discuss my driveway, let's talk about yours." I pulled out a folder containing the official county records and land surveys. I smirked. According to public records, the HOA's own driveway was built illegally across protected wetlands, meaning you've been violating county regulations for years. Gasps echoed through the room. Sarah's face turned pale. That can't be right." I turned to the mayor. "Would you like to explain what happens when someone builds an illegal road on protected land?" He stepped forward, looking directly at Sarah. "Well, by law, it has to be shut down immediately." The room exploded in whispers. "You can't be serious," Sarah stammered. "Oh, I am," the mayor replied. "Since you're so passionate about following the rules, you'll have to remove your entire driveway, effective immediately." The HOA board members panicked. Without their driveway, their entire office would be inaccessible. And the best part? There was nothing they could do about it. By the end of the week, the county officially shut down the HOA's driveway. The same people who had tried to strong-arm me into removing my driveway now had to watch their own be ripped apart. With no access to their office, the HOA was thrown into complete disarray. Sarah Middleton eventually resigned in disgrace. And as for my driveway, it's still there, and always will be, because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. When people try to take what's yours, sometimes the best revenge is using their own rules against them. After taking down the HOA's driveway and watching their board scramble in confusion, I thought I had won, but I should have known better. People like Sarah Middleton don't go down without a fight. For a brief moment, things seemed quiet. The HOA's main office remained inaccessible, and without a functional entrance, their ability to enforce petty rules crumbled. It was satisfying to see them struggle. But then, strange things started happening. A week after the HOA lost their driveway, I woke up to something strange outside my house. A tow truck sat in my driveway, flashing its lights. My car, a perfectly legal, properly registered vehicle, was already halfway lifted off the ground. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I shouted, rushing outside. The driver barely glanced at me. "HOA violation," he grumbled. I snatched the clipboard out of his hands. "Unauthorized vehicle on private property? Are you joking?" He just shrugged. "I get paid either way." I yanked my phone out of my pocket and dialed the sheriff's office. 10 minutes later, a deputy arrived. The tow truck driver still hadn't lowered my car, probably hoping I'd just pay the fine. The deputy glanced at the paperwork, then at me. "Mr. Carter, this order isn't valid," I smirked. Exactly what I thought. The deputy turned to the tow truck driver. "Release the vehicle now." With a defeated sigh, he lowered my car and sped off. But I knew exactly who was behind this. Sarah Middleton. And this was only the beginning. The next morning, I woke up to find my mailbox missing. Just gone. In its place was a bright red notice. Violation 204B, unapproved mailbox placement. Fine, $500. I laughed, loudly. They were getting desperate. By that evening, I had installed a new mailbox, twice as big, twice as reinforced, and set in concrete. The day after that, my trash bins disappeared. A note was left in their place. Violation 102A, improper waste disposal. Fine, $750. I started documenting everything. I took photos, videos, timestamps, and even installed security cameras. If they were going to play dirty, I needed evidence. And then, things got personal. I run a small but successful contracting business. My team handles residential renovations, kitchens, decks, and custom builds. Most of my work is done outside HOA-controlled areas, so when I started losing contracts overnight, I knew something was wrong. One by one, my clients began canceling their jobs. "I'm sorry, but we were advised not to work with you." Advised? By who? Then I found out. A close friend of mine, Mark, one of my longtime clients, pulled me aside. "The HOA's been spreading rumors, Carter. They're telling people you're under investigation for fraud." I clenched my jaw. "That's a damn lie." Mark sighed. "I know, but people are scared. No one wants to risk it." This wasn't just about fines anymore. Sarah Middleton was trying to destroy my livelihood. If they thought they could scare me into submission, they were wrong. I called up my lawyer, Jacob Reynolds, a bulldog of a man who had taken on HOA cases before. When I laid out my evidence, he whistled. "Damn, this isn't just HOA pettiness. This is targeted harassment. We can sue them." That same afternoon, we filed a cease and desist order against the Green Pines HOA, citing harassment, defamation, illegal fines, tampering with private property. But I wasn't done yet. Using my security footage, I tracked down the exact person who had removed my trash bins and mailbox. It was a hired worker, paid directly by the HOA. I forwarded everything to the county commissioner. And then I played my trump card. What Sarah Middleton didn't know was that I had one more ace up my sleeve. The mayor owed me a favor. See, 2 years ago I had helped oversee renovations at City Hall, a project that had run into major issues. My company fixed things under budget and ahead of schedule. The mayor never forgot that. So when I called him up and explained what was happening, he immediately got involved. The HOA is overstepping, again. His voice was tight with irritation. Let me handle this. The next morning, the county inspector showed up with a team. They went through every record the HOA had. And what they found? Shady financial transactions, illegal fines, HOA board members using funds for personal expenses. Oh, and the best part? Their own headquarters was built without proper permits. The following week, I attended a special town hall meeting. The entire neighborhood showed up. Sarah Middleton sat at the front, looking nervous. She should have been. The county commissioner, the mayor, and 2 investigators were present. When the findings were read aloud, the room erupted. $78,000 in missing funds, hundreds of fraudulent fines, dozens of harassment complaints, multiple fake violations issued without due process. Sarah tried to defend herself. "This is all a misunderstanding," she stammered. The commissioner shook his head. "The only misunderstanding here is how you thought you'd get away with this." The HOA was shut down that night. Sarah Middleton was removed as president, and a criminal investigation was launched. And as for my driveway, still standing. They may have lost their power, but some HOA members weren't ready to back down. And that's when things got even uglier. I thought taking down Sarah Middleton and exposing the HOA's corruption would be the final nail in the coffin, but I underestimated how far desperate people would go to cling to power. After the town hall meeting, the HOA was officially dissolved, their finances frozen pending investigation. The board members scattered, trying to cover their tracks. Sarah Middleton disappeared completely. For the first time in years, the neighborhood felt free, but that peace wouldn't last, because someone wasn't willing to let it all go. The first sign of trouble came late one night. I had just finished securing the last of my security cameras when my phone buzzed. Unknown caller. At first I ignored it, but then came the text message. "Drop the lawsuit. This isn't over." I frowned. The HOA was dead. Sarah was disgraced. Who the hell was still fighting? A few nights later, I got my answer. I woke up to the sound of breaking glass. Rushing downstairs, I found my truck's windshield shattered. A brick lay on the hood, wrapped in a note. "You ruined everything. Leave, or we make you." That's when I knew. Sarah Middleton wasn't working alone. I reviewed my security footage, expecting to see Sarah or one of her board members. But what I saw instead shocked me. It wasn't a disgruntled HOA member. It was James Calloway, the real estate developer behind the HOA, the man who had poured millions into Pine Ridge Estates and had backed Sarah Middleton from day one. I should have known. Sarah had been a puppet all along. Calloway was the true mastermind, and now that the HOA was gone, he had everything to lose. I took my footage straight to Sheriff Andrews, the only law enforcement officer in town who hadn't been bribed by Calloway. "This is bad," he muttered, watching the footage. "If Calloway's involved, this isn't just HOA corruption anymore. This is organized crime." We both knew Calloway wasn't going to stop until he got what he wanted. And that's when the arson started. 3 nights later, I woke up to the smell of smoke. Running outside, I saw flames licking up the side of my barn. Someone had doused it in gasoline and set it ablaze. I grabbed my hose, trying to fight it, but it was useless. The fire spread fast. By the time the fire department arrived, my barn was reduced to ash. And standing at the edge of my property, James Calloway, watching, smiling. I wasn't going to wait for Calloway to burn down my house next. It was time to fight back. I gathered every shred of evidence, security footage, financial records, and sworn statements from former HOA members who had turned against Calloway. And then, I took it to the FBI. Because this wasn't just a local HOA dispute anymore. This was organized fraud, property destruction, and racketeering. Calloway had been illegally profiting from HOA fees, forcing people to sell their homes so he could develop high-end properties on stolen land. And now, thanks to his careless mistakes, I had enough proof to bury him. The FBI moved fast. By the time Calloway realized what was happening, it was too late. His accounts were frozen, his company raided. And as I watched from my porch, I saw the moment his luck finally ran out. The FBI agents tackled him as he tried to flee. They dragged him to a squad car, slapping handcuffs on his wrists. His empire? Gone. His power? Vanished. And just like that, the nightmare was finally over. Or so I thought. With Calloway in custody, I believed I was safe. But what I didn't realize was that someone close to me had been working with him all along. I thought it was over. I thought that with Calloway in custody, the nightmare would finally end. But I was wrong. Because while Calloway had been the face of this corruption, he wasn't the only one pulling strings. Someone inside my circle had been feeding him information all along. And I was about to find out just how deep the betrayal ran. 2 days after Calloway's arrest, I got a call from the FBI. "Mr. Walker, we have a problem." A problem? What kind of problem? Calloway was caught. The HOA was dissolved. What else could go wrong? "The documents you submitted, some of the key evidence files have been erased." My blood ran cold. Erased? That was impossible. I had triple backups. I had stored everything on encrypted drives. Someone had deleted the files from inside the investigation. There was a traitor, someone close to me. And that's when it hit me. I had trusted the wrong person. There was only one person who had access to my encrypted files besides me. Gerald Fisher, the former HOA treasurer who had claimed he wanted to help. The man who had handed me the HOA financial records. The one who had insisted on helping me gather evidence against Calloway. He was in on it. I drove straight to his house, my mind racing. I wanted to be wrong. I needed to be wrong. But as I pulled up to his driveway, I saw something that confirmed my worst fear. His car was missing. And on his doorstep, a burning pile of shredded documents. He was running. I didn't hesitate. I turned my truck around and headed straight to the one place Gerald would go if he was trying to escape, his office in the city. I knew he kept a second set of financial records there, along with his personal accounts. If Gerald had been helping Calloway, then those documents would show exactly where the stolen HOA money had gone. I pushed my truck to its limit, racing against time. Because if Gerald got away, everything I had fought for would be lost. When I arrived at his office, I expected a fight. What I didn't expect was to find Gerald frantically stuffing cash into a duffel bag. "Going somewhere?" I asked, stepping inside. He froze. His face turned pale. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered. I was just clearing out my things." I pointed to the bag of cash. "Yeah? And that's just your lunch money?" His eyes darted to the side door, calculating if he could make a run for it. I took a step forward. "Sit down." For the first time, Gerald realized there was no way out. It took less than 10 minutes for him to crack. He spilled everything. Gerald had been working for Calloway the whole time. Calloway had paid him off years ago to keep quiet about the stolen HOA funds. But when I came along and started exposing the fraud, Calloway ordered him to sabotage my investigation from the inside, deleting files, corrupting records, feeding me half-truths to throw me off. And when that failed, they tried to destroy me. The shattered truck windshield, the barn fire, the death threats. All of it had been orchestrated to scare me into backing down. But when I didn't, Calloway went after me directly. And now, with Calloway gone, Gerald was next in line to take the fall. I could have walked away, let Gerald run. But I wasn't going to let another corrupt snake escape justice. So I pulled out my phone and played the entire confession back to him. The live recording that had been streaming straight to Sheriff Andrews' office. The moment Gerald realized he was caught, he slumped back in his chair. "Game over," I said. And this time, it really was. Gerald was arrested that night. With his confession, the FBI was able to recover the missing evidence, locking in Calloway's conviction. The stolen HOA money seized and returned to the community. And as for me, I stood in front of what remained of my grandfather's land, knowing I had finally won. This wasn't just about me anymore. This was about every homeowner who had been bullied, cheated, and stolen from. Calloway was gone. Gerald was gone. The HOA was gone. And Pine Ridge Estates? Finally free. Months later, I received a letter in the mail, a formal apology from the town, a settlement check for damages, and most importantly, a new deed, one that restored my grandfather's land back to its rightful owner, me. As I stood at the edge of the property, I could almost hear his voice in the wind. "You did good, kid." I smiled. For the first time in a long time, everything was finally as it should be. I took a deep breath, steadying myself as I read over the documents once more. The sheer weight of what I had uncovered was enough to send any normal person running, but I wasn't backing down. Not now. Just as I was processing my next move, a sudden knock at the door made me jump. My pulse quickened as I approached the entrance, my mind racing through the possibilities. Was it Diane? Someone from the HOA? One of her goons? I peeked through the peephole, my stomach tightening when I saw an unfamiliar man in a dark suit standing on my porch. He held a sleek black folder in his hands, his expression unreadable. I hesitated for only a moment before opening the door. "Mr. Walker?" the man greeted me, his voice eerily calm. "I was hoping we could have a word." "Who are you?" I asked, keeping the door halfway closed. The man gave a thin smile. "The name's Charles Whitmore, legal counsel for Pine Ridge Estates." Of course. I figured Diane would send someone after the lawsuit was filed. I leaned against the doorframe, crossing my arms. "Let me guess. You're here to make me an offer?" Charles let out a soft chuckle. "You're a sharp one, Mr. Walker. Yes, we'd like to resolve this matter quickly and quietly. No need for unnecessary hostility." I scoffed. "No hostility? Your client stole my grandfather's land." A pause. Charles's smile didn't waver, but I saw the way his fingers tightened around the folder. "I understand your frustration," he said smoothly. "But there are ways to fix this situation that don't involve a drawn-out legal battle. The HOA is prepared to compensate you handsomely for your trouble." There it was. "How much?" I asked, playing along for a moment. Charles flipped open the folder and produced a sleek contract, tapping a line at the bottom. $1 million tax-free. The money will be wired to you within 24 hours and all legal disputes will be dropped immediately." I stared at the contract, my heart pounding. $1 million. More money than I had ever seen in my life. With that kind of cash, I could buy land elsewhere, start fresh, leave this mess behind. But I thought about my grandfather, about the hours I had spent in his fields as a kid, about the sweat and love he had poured into this land. I thought about the elderly neighbors who had been bullied into selling their homes, about the families struggling under Diane's oppressive rule. $1 million meant nothing compared to that. I met Charles's gaze, my decision firm. "Not interested." His smile faltered for the first time. "Mr. Walker, I advise you to reconsider." "I already have." A slow exhale. Charles closed the folder with an audible snap, straightening his tie. I was hoping we could settle this peacefully. But if you insist on playing hardball— He let the sentence trail off, his meaning clear. Are we done here? I asked. A long silence stretched between us before Charles gave a curt nod. For now. He turned on his heel and strode back to his car, but I knew this wasn't over. Diane wasn't going to give up that easily, and I wasn't going to let her win. That night, things escalated. I was sitting at the kitchen table going over more paperwork when my phone buzzed. It was a text from Mrs. Thompson. "Something's happening. Get outside. Now." My stomach twisted. I rushed to the front door and froze. 4 large black SUVs were parked along the road outside my property. Several men in dark clothes stood near the tree line, talking in hushed voices. And then I heard the sound, a low rumble, growing louder. I spun toward the eastern field where my grandfather's crops used to grow and saw bulldozers roaring to life, their headlights piercing the darkness. Panic shot through me like ice water. They were starting construction again. Even with a legal injunction in place, Diane and her cronies weren't backing down. They were betting on the fact that I wouldn't be able to stop them in time. I grabbed my phone and dialed the sheriff's office. "I need an officer at my property immediately," I said, my voice sharp. "Pine Ridge Estates is violating a court order." "Sir, we don't handle civil disputes," the dispatcher replied. "This isn't a civil dispute. This is trespassing and destruction of private property." A pause. Then, "We'll send someone out." But I knew how this worked. By the time they got here, the damage would already be done. I wasn't going to wait. I ran back inside, grabbed my truck keys, and sped down the dirt path toward the field. I cut in front of the lead bulldozer, slamming the brakes so hard that my truck skidded in the dirt. I threw open the door and jumped out, standing directly in their path. The driver honked aggressively, revving the engine. I didn't move. A man in a suit, one of Diane's lackeys, stormed toward me. "Get out of the way!" I crossed my arms. "You're trespassing. There's a court order against this development." "We have the necessary approvals," the man shot back. "No," I said, voice firm. "You don't." More headlights appeared in the distance. Finally, the sheriff's deputy had arrived. The deputy stepped out, hand resting on his holster as he took in the scene. "What's going on here?" "This man is obstructing legally approved construction," Diane's goon said quickly. I handed the deputy the court order. "This proves otherwise." The deputy read over the document, his expression hardening. He turned to the workers. "Shut it down! Now!" Grumbling, the men shut off the engines. The bulldozers powered down, their lights flickering out. Diane's lackey looked furious. "This isn't over," I smirked. "Oh, I know." But as I watched the workers leave, I realized something. Diane was getting desperate, and desperate people made mistakes. The next morning, I woke up to a notice taped to my front door. Eviction notice, 48 hours to vacate. My blood boiled. They were trying to scare me out, but they had just made a critical mistake, because now I was taking this fight straight to the courts, and this time, I wasn't going to play nice. I stood at my front door, my hands clenched into fists as I stared at the eviction notice Diane had taped there overnight. The audacity of it made my blood boil. She wasn't just trying to force me out. She wanted to erase me from my own land, from my own family's history. But she had just made her final mistake. I took a deep breath, pulled the notice off the door, and grabbed my phone. It was time to strike back. I stood at my front door, my hands clenched into fists as I stared at the eviction notice Diane had taped there overnight. The audacity of it made my blood boil. She wasn't just trying to force me out. She wanted to erase me from my own land, from my own family's history. But she had just made her final mistake. I took a deep breath, pulled the notice off the door, and grabbed my phone. It was time to strike back. The next morning, I was in my lawyer's office before the sun had even fully risen. Walter Franklin, my attorney, was already reviewing the eviction notice when I arrived. His expression darkened as he skimmed through it. "This is complete garbage," he muttered. "She has no legal right to evict you from your own land. She's bluffing." I slammed my fist on the desk. "I don't care if it's a bluff. I want this ended. I want her gone, Walter." He nodded. "Then we escalate." Over the next 48 hours, Walter and his team worked tirelessly. They filed an emergency restraining order against Diane and the Pine Ridge HOA, preventing them from stepping foot on my land. At the same time, we compiled every piece of evidence of fraud, harassment, and illegal land transfers we had uncovered. But that wasn't enough. I wanted everyone to see who Diane Reynolds truly was, so I did something I knew would make her worst nightmare come true. I called the media. By the time Saturday morning arrived, the front gates of Pine Ridge Estates were swarmed with news vans. Journalists from every major station had shown up after I leaked the documents detailing Diane's fraudulent land deals, the forged signatures, and the HOA's corruption. Homeowners, many of whom had been silenced or bullied by Diane, began stepping forward, finally feeling safe enough to share their stories. "I was fined over $1,000 for having a lawn gnome," one elderly man said into the camera. "She forced me to sell my house for less than it was worth, then turned around and flipped it for triple the price," another woman added. And then, to everyone's shock, Gerald Fisher, the HOA's own treasurer, stepped up to the podium. "I've been handling the HOA's financials for years," Gerald said, his voice shaking. "And I can tell you this. Diane Reynolds has been using homeowner fees to fund her personal vacations, her luxury car payments, and even her own house renovations." The reporters went wild, cameras flashing as Gerald handed over boxes of financial records to the authorities. Diane was finished. But I wasn't done yet. 1 week later, we stood in court. Diane sat across from me, her usually smug expression replaced with one of barely concealed rage. Her lawyer tried to argue that the land had been transferred legally, but Walter tore that argument apart. "Your Honor," Walter said, holding up the forensic analysis of the forged documents, "the signature on these land transfers is a fraudulent replication of Mr. Walker's grandfather's handwriting. We have expert testimony proving that he was physically unable to sign anything at the time of this so-called sale." The judge flipped through the evidence, his face like stone, but then Walter delivered the final blow. "Furthermore, we have obtained records showing that Ms. Reynolds personally authorized the falsification of county documents, redirecting property boundaries without legal authority." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. Diane's face went white. "Ms. Reynolds," the judge said slowly, fixing her with a stare that could melt steel, "do you have anything to say before I make my ruling?" Diane's lips parted, but no words came out. She looked around the room as if searching for an escape. There was none. The gavel slammed down. "The court rules in favor of Mr. Walker. The fraudulent land transfer is nullified and the Pine Ridge HOA is hereby dissolved." I stepped outside the courthouse, victorious. The cameras were waiting. "Mr. Walker, how do you feel about today's ruling?" a reporter asked. I smirked. Like justice was served. Diane was escorted out of the building in handcuffs, her face red with humiliation. She tried to avoid the cameras, but there was no hiding now. She had spent years ruling over people with an iron fist, believing she was untouchable. Now, she was just another fraudster facing serious prison time. But my fight wasn't just about her. That night, I stood on my grandfather's land, looking over the fields that had nearly been stolen from me. The wind rustled through the trees, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. Because the land was mine again, and this time, no one was ever going to take it away from me.